Hi guys! We're going to be learning about relationships this week, and I decided to record. I tend to talk a lot with my hands, so I decided to record this with a visual. So I'm sitting outside so you guys get to see the wind and the trees and the sun. Beautiful day, and so you may hear some birds or some noise from the wind. I'm sorry about that. So we're going to be talking about relationships. And the first thing I decided to teach you about relationships is something called boundaries. Now, you might not have heard of boundaries before, and you might know all about them. So hopefully this will be a good primer for people if you've not understood what boundaries are. But the point of teaching you about boundaries is that boundaries are what keep us safe and they keep our relationships healthy. And so any good, healthy relationship must have boundaries. You are in charge of your boundaries, and you're in charge of how you handle other people's boundaries. So let's get started. Now, this is going to be a shorter lesson because I have a lot of pictures and stuff. But first things I want to say is that currently, coronavirus aside, there's about 7.7 billion people in the world. That's a really big number. Um, Obviously, 7.7 billion people, the vast, vast majority of them don't know about you. They don't care about you. You have nothing to do with their existence. The same way, the vast majority of those 7.7 billion have nothing to do with you and you don't care about them. So the people you actually have in your life that you're connected with, these are the people that matter. These are the relationships that you need to work on and that you need to be careful about. So that's why we're going to talk about relationships. Now, this is something that everybody, whether they're a total recluse or whether they're a social butterfly, everyone needs to know how to have good, healthy relationships. So I have some quotes to start us out. This is a quote from an author of a book I read that was very interesting when I was your age. It's called I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. It's about this woman's kind of recovery from a severe mental illness. And so the quote from the book says, health is not simply the absence of sickness. So a healthy relationship is not a relationship that just doesn't have abuse. It doesn't have bad things happening. That's not the definition of a healthy relationship. So we're going to talk about what the definition is in a minute. But health, good health, is not just the absence of sickness, but it's the actual uh, benefit and existence of goodness in your health, goodness in your relationships and your life. So here's our definition that I'm going to be working for. I found this one, I really like it, and I like the elephant picture. A healthy relationship is where two independently healthy and happy people make a deal that they will help the other person be the best version of themselves that they can be. Now, I know you can have relationships with more than two people, more than one person, but every relationship is a one-to-one. Okay? So if you have two parents in your life, your relationship with your mother is a one-to-one, and your relationship with your father is a one-to-one. Your relationship with your siblings is a one-to-one. So any of those relationships can be healthy or unhealthy. So if it's healthy, what's happening there is that both people in the relationship are trying to help the other person be the best version of themselves that they can be. Now, there's a lot of other definitions of relationships and healthy you can find. This is the one I happen to like because oftentimes we forget what's the point of relationship. We see other people as resources for us. It's a very narcissistic way of thinking, but we're all prone to it. We see other people as tools or other people as resources or other people as they're there when I'm having a bad day. We don't necessarily think I'm in this relationship for their sake. What am I going to bring to them? And so healthy means each person is independently healthy and happy. Each person can exist on their own without the other person. And together, they decide to be in relationship to help each other by supporting, by encouraging, sometimes by calling somebody to the mat when they're really screwing their life up. Um, all of these things have a factor in a healthy relationship. So it sounds simple, but of course it's not. And the reason why is we talked about trauma this past week, and trauma and bad things that happen to you and the things that you've done, all of that turns into a lot of baggage. And all of us who are above the age of about 2 or so have baggage. And that baggage makes it difficult to have a healthy relationship. Not to mention, all of us are selfish at our core. We're self-centered. You know, they say if you want to talk to a toddler, that's fine as long as you understand the toddler's world, everything in that world revolves around the toddler. You don't know if this is true, go meet a toddler. Everything is mine. The world is mine. Mommy is mine. Daddy is mine. If you pick up a toy, that's mine. Even if it was your toy a minute ago, now it's mine. Okay? That's very much how we all start out. And although we go through life, we eventually learn that the world doesn't really revolve around us. Somewhere deep inside, we still believe it. And so all of that baggage, all of that selfishness, all of those flaws that we haven't learned how to overcome, or maybe we can't overcome, maybe they're genetic. All of those make healthy relationships extremely challenging. And that's why we're going to spend 2 weeks on relationships. So this is a quote that I really like because it's basically like everything that you can imagine happening in the world in a nutshell. So this is a quote from Augustine. This is a guy from, I think, about 3rd or 4th century. Let us never assume that if we live good lives, we will be without sin. Sin in this case meaning doing the wrong thing. Our lives should be praised only when we continue to beg for pardon, when we apologize for the wrong things that we do. And this is where Augustine gets very practical. And he says, men are hopeless creatures. And the less that they concentrate on their own sins, the less attention they pay to their own mess, the more interested they become in the sins or the hot mess of other people. And then they seek to criticize, not to correct. Unable to excuse themselves, they are ready to accuse others. Now we talked about the pointing the finger, right? You point the finger at somebody, you've got 1, 2, 3 fingers pointing right back at you. This is very much how people are. And they've been this way for thousands of years. This is why Augustine could comment on this almost 2,000 years ago. And it's still true today. The less you want to look at your own mess and the things that you do wrong, the more you're looking around trying to point fingers at other people. So this is a factor that's going to be happening in every relationship. Everyone can usually say, well, that person did this to me at some point, even your best friend. Well, there was that time that she told so and so, or yeah, there was that time that he stole my ball in 3rd grade. And so I really, we're over it, but like, yeah, he did do that. Sorry, there's bugs in the air out here. Love the outside though. Okay? And this is a quote from Charles Spurgeon. Beware of no man more than of yourself. We carry our worst enemies within us. This is a great quote to remember because all of us have this as part of our reality. We are our own worst enemy. And that's sad but true. Nobody forces us to screw up our lives. Other people can harm our lives, but they can't screw up our lives. We do that ourselves. And this is one I just thought was a really great quote, so I threw it in here anyways, although it's not exactly in line of what I'm kind of going on. So it says, should you ever find yourself the victim of other people's bitterness, jealousy, lies, insecurities, I would include gossip, backstabbing, betrayal, all that mess. Don't be mad, although I think you can be mad. This is just kind of a quote, remember. Remember, things could be worse. You could be them. So just a perspective shot. You could be that nasty kind of selfish person. And seeing all that nasty, selfish bitterness, jealousy, lies, gossip in other people should help remind us that we are prone to the same temptations as they are, and we should be looking at ourselves to weed out those kind of horrible character traits in our own garden, if you want to call it that. All right, so this is a Nearpod slide, and I'm going to put it up for you to respond to as a student code. And the question is, how can messed up people have healthy relationships? And I want to hear what you guys have to say about it. Okay? So how to be healthy? So the number one, most important, absolutely 1,000%, you need to be 100,000,000,000% sure, and you have to know this deep down, is that nobody else in this world can make you happy or healthy. I can't make you happy. Your mother can't make you happy. Your father can't make you happy. Your friends can't make you happy. Nobody can make you healthy. You can go to a therapist. Any therapist will tell you, I cannot fix my patients. They must make the decisions towards health themselves. None of us can make one other person happy. Now, we can do things that might make them feel temporarily happy. I'm not denying that. So, if my husband brought me home some beautiful flowers, that would make me temporarily feel a feeling of happiness. Thank you, honey. I do like that. I appreciate that. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about happiness in general. If you feel happy or unhappy with your life, with everything that you have in your life, nobody can make you happy. Now, I had students say, well, what if I won the lottery? Or what if, blah, blah, blah. What if somebody made me dinner? That would definitely make me happy. Those are temporary, short-term happiness things. I'm talking about long-term, you are generally speaking happy with your life. And nobody can do that for you. Now, if you expect someone else to make you happy, they're like, well, I'm generally a miserable, unhealthy person, but you are going to make me happy and healthy. That is unfair, it's selfish, and it's lazy. And on top of all that, it simply won't work. You cannot expect or force someone else to be responsible for your own happiness, your own healthiness. You can try, but it leads to nothing except misery for you and for them. Now, this is one of the major mistakes many, many, many people make. And they believe, if only this person would do this, then I would be happy. If only I would have a great relationship with my father, if only he would do this. No. He is responsible for him, you are responsible for you. You cannot base your happiness on someone else. You have to do your best to be healthy in your relationships, but you have no control over whether those people are going to be healthy and kind and good to you. So that's where we're getting into boundaries here. So it's not going to work if you try to depend or assume or force someone else to be happy for you. However, while they can't make you happy, they can certainly make you very unhappy. And I see this all the time in unhappy marriages. It is very easy to make someone else's life miserable. So you have to hold your boundaries. So this is a good quote I liked. Happiness is an inside job. Don't assign anyone else that much power over your life. I feel like this is very much true. Inside job means it's up to you. Your happiness, your health is up to you, not anyone else. So boundaries is how you protect yourself and others from this problem. And it's also temptation. What temptation means is you are tempted to hold someone else's boundaries for them when they should be doing it for themselves. Or you are tempted to not hold boundaries with someone and let them break your own boundaries for your own reasons. This is a very strong temptation, especially for people pleasers. If you're a people pleaser, you are going to struggle with this for the rest of your life. And so as I was saying, holding these boundaries can be very difficult. So let me give you the example. Um, if you have a relationship with someone who's a drug addict, for example, drug addicts or any kind of addict, if you are addicted to something, if you can't just walk away from it tomorrow and say, I'm never going to touch that again, I'm never going to do that again, I'm never going to, ingest that again or whatever, then you're addicted to something. And if you're addicted, you cannot hold boundaries against that, and it leads you to breaking your own boundaries for other things. It also leads you to breaking other people's boundaries. So I gave the example in class of my stepbrother who was a drug addict. And one of the things that he did was break boundaries of the people near him in order to get money. So he stole from people in order to get money. And this is just one example of one kind of boundary that people who are addicts tend to break. There's all kinds of different kinds of addictions. And so you can be, like I mentioned, addicted to people pleasing. You can be setting your own happiness on what others think of you. And that's a kind of addiction as well. So if you are healthy, what you have are good boundaries. So let's talk about what good boundaries look like. So what is within my boundaries? Now, another way of saying this is what is within my control. Now, you might not feel like all of these things are necessarily under your control. For example, when we talked about anger, a lot of you said, no, I am not in control of my anger. Okay, that's something that you can think about more fully. But your emotions may not be under your direct control. You do tend to feel them, but how you act on them is in your control. So our feelings, we can't maybe help how we feel about something, but we can act in self-control about what those feelings create in us and what they do for us. So you can be angry and not punch a wall. You can be sad that someone betrayed you, but not go and make a horrible video about them and post it so all their friends see it and then they're embarrassed, okay? Having your boundaries around your feelings means that you understand that how you feel is your responsibility. It's not someone else's. You can't say you are responsible for whether I feel like getting up in the morning. This is something that abusers tend to do very much, and we're going to talk about abuse later on. Abusers tell their victims, you are responsible for whether or not I kill myself. This is a very common ploy. Saying that I'm going to kill myself unless you do this or you make me feel more happy or whatever. Trying to put the control for someone else's choice about suicide onto someone else. That is a boundary issue. And it's a manipulative tactic as well, which we'll talk about when we talk about abuse. So you have to be aware of your own feelings. You can't just shove them down deep, dark inside and hope they never come out, because as we talked about, they explode out of us somehow at some time in ways that are unpleasant. So you have to be aware of your own feelings, and you have to say, I know I feel jealous right now of Sandy getting to go on that trip when I'm stuck at home. Okay? I acknowledge my own jealousy. That's something a mature, healthy adult does, and you're getting there. You guys aren't quite there into adulthood yet, but you're getting there, and so this is something you need to learn. I acknowledge that I don't even like how jealous I am, or how envious, or how angry I am, but I acknowledge that this is how I feel. Don't try to pretend to anyone else, especially don't try to pretend to yourself that you are holier than thou, okay? Because you're not. We're all screwed up. We're all messed up. We're all selfish. If you do start feeling and recognizing, I am feeling jealous, I am feeling, and you're like, that's not really a nice way to be, and I don't know if I want to be that person, then you can do something about it. But if you're completely oblivious and not willing to acknowledge that that's how you are, then you are being somewhat mentally unhealthy. Because lying to yourself is a mental issue. It's a mental illness issue. And the further down you go that road, you lead yourself into narcissism and things like that. Narcissists are experts at lying to themselves and telling themselves that they are better people than they actually are. So don't be that. Don't do that. Be honest with yourself. Acknowledge your feelings. And then deal with them as a healthy, mature adult. Okay, the second thing that's in your control, in your boundaries, in your garden, okay? So I'm going to use the term garden over and over. What that means is that if you think about yourself as a garden, sometimes weeds grow up, sometimes flowers. You are the gardener and you're responsible for pulling the weeds out and tending to the healthy, good plants. And so what's in your garden, your boundaries, your little box is the things that I'm talking about right now. So your attitudes and beliefs are in your garden. No one else is in charge of those. Now, your parents, your teachers, people you respect may have told you or influenced you to believe or think a certain way, and that's okay. We learn everything in the world when we start out young from the people we know. As we get older, and you guys are about at the age where critical thinking starts happening, you might want to start questioning, why do I believe this? And find your own reasons for believing or not believing something. The attitudes you have towards things in your life. For example, your belief in God or disbelief, your desire to do a good job when you're working, or your desire to be lazy when you're working. Your relationships, you're putting effort into a relationship, or you're willing to just walk away and not bother. All of these things, all of these beliefs, all of these attitudes are in our control. So we can't go around blaming other people. I am like this because my mom is this way, or I am like this because my dad is this way. No, no, that's not how it works. If you want to be a healthy adult, you own your own junk, okay? Your own attitudes, your own beliefs. You can be wrong. One of the signs of a mature, healthy person is that they know and can acknowledge, yeah, I was actually wrong there. I screwed up. Man, that was bad. That's mature and that's healthy, and that's what you need to be concerned about. And not allow other people to dictate these things to you. Okay? You have to come up with your own ideas. It takes, remember, this is one of the quotes I talked about at the beginning of the year. Deciding and making your own decisions takes hard work, but it's your responsibility. Okay, so now behaviors, choices have consequences. I had it on every test. You guys should have it memorized by now. Behaviors, actions have consequences, and you are the person who those consequences will hit, but they also hit other people depending on what kind of actions you've chosen. So for example, if I brake, if I'm backing up my car and I don't see that my child has left their bicycle behind the car, and I don't check behind my car, and I back up over it and I brake it, that's a consequence of having a broken thing. The child had the behavior of leaving the thing out, left them out where we get backed up over, and the adult had the consequence of not checking. So there's shared consequences there, and that's a natural consequences. The bike is gone. And whether or not someone should repair it or replace it, those are things that happen after you have consequences. To take someone else's natural consequences from them is to render that person powerless, and it is not doing them any favors. So, for example, if someone cheated on a test for me as a teacher, if I let them get away with it, I am not doing them a favor. In fact, I'm helping them learn that cheating has good consequences and that it will encourage them to cheat further on down the line, and maybe they get married and they cheat on their spouse. But I do nobody a favor if I blink or look the other way to cheating. And so nobody ever does anyone a favor if you look away from the natural consequences of what someone has done, or you permit them to continue on in an action that is not okay because you just want to be nice. And this is one of the things I see all the time talking to people who are in bad relationships, is that they don't want to be mean. Healthy is not nice. Okay? So if you want to be a nice person, you cannot be a healthy person. If you want to be a healthy person, sometimes you can't be nice. Because nice doesn't love the other person truly. Love wants the best for the other person, just like we talked about relationships. A healthy relationship is where you're helping them, the other person, to be the best version of themselves as possible, not the worst. And if you permit certain behaviors to be done to you or to others, If you allow things to be done without natural consequences, you are not loving the other person. You're not being nice. In fact, you're actually being quite cruel, because it is often only when we get natural consequences for our bad behaviors that we learn from them. So you're stunting the other person as well. So you should always allow people to reap the natural consequences of their behaviors. Now, sometimes you can show mercy. So for example, if my child left out a bike, it got hit by lightning, the bike is destroyed, it's totally the kid's fault. I can still show mercy and say, it was your fault. You've lost your bike through your own actions, and I'm sorry about that. I'm going to show mercy. I'm not going to let you get what you deserve. I'm going to get you a new bike. That's showing mercy. That's slightly different from not holding someone to consequences, because you acknowledge these are the natural consequences to your behavior. This is what you are due. This is what you're owed. This is what you've earned with this bad behavior. But I'm choosing not to give you that punishment or that consequence. That's called mercy. It's not merciful to just excuse bad behavior. Okay, another thing we need to talk about is our choices, the choices we make. A common boundary problem is to disown our choices and try to lay the responsibility for them on someone else. So if you ever say, he made me do it, I couldn't help it. No, that's not true. You agreed. Now, for an extreme example, let's say you're in a bank and a bank robber comes in and the bank robber tells you, take this gun and shoot the teller. And you say, I had to do it. He made me do it. No, you had two choices. You could have refused and gotten shot yourself. Okay? You always have at least two choices. Most of us, when we say, he made me do it, she made me do it, what we're really saying is, I didn't like the other option, so I went along with this without making a fuss. But really, you're making the choice yourself. No one can force you to do anything. Any parent of a toddler will tell you, you can't. I mean, you can bodily pick someone up, but once they get past the age of being picked up and moved physically, you can't force them to do anything. I mean, there was actually a legal case that happened in a foreign country that one of my friends was involved in, and so I learned about. There was a girl who was in foster care, and she was adopted. But because of the beliefs she'd ingested, the toxic beliefs she's ingested while she was abused in foster care, she believed she didn't deserve to live. And so she literally starved herself to death. And her foster family tried everything they could to get her to eat, but eventually she managed to kill herself by refusing to eat. Now, she could have been hospitalized, but unless you're going to hospitalize somebody and force feed them through a tube and sedate them for the rest of their lives, that's not living. You can't force someone to live if they're choosing to die. So we are always in our choices are always our boundaries. We have to take responsibility for our choices. Another one is our values. What we choose to give love to, assign importance to. I value loyalty very much. And so one of the things that hurts me is disloyalty. If you value honesty, then one of the things that will hurt you is dishonesty. We all choose our values. And sometimes we can value the wrong things or love the wrong things. I love myself more than I love my neighbor, so I'm not going to go help them when they need help mowing their lawn because they're sick. Okay? We have to be the person to choose our own values, and we have to be the person to live by those consequences. No one else can give us values. Our parents can influence our values, but they cannot choose our values for us. The same thing with our limits. We must set our own limits. We must be self-controlled. We have to take ownership. So for example, let's say that you were playing a computer game until 11 o'clock, and you know if you go to bed any later than 11, you're going to be grumpy with your family the next day. And you choose to keep playing. And the next morning, sure enough, you're grumpy with your family. That was your choice. You did not control your limits. And so other people are having to suffer bad consequences. Now, as young adults, there are certain limits that you are still required to obey from your parents or your guardians. And there's still certain limits that society places on you no matter what your age. And those are, generally speaking, good limits, like don't murder people. I mean, obviously, people are debating about the merits of the current quarantine limits right now, but regardless of that, our own limits are the things that only we are able to choose. And that is what we are able to exert control over. We cannot control society, but we can control ourselves. And that's the difference here. A boundary is something you actually have control over. You can't have a boundary. You can't hold a boundary against something that you can't control. And that's why all of these things are only about yourself. You can't control someone else's limits. For example, going to the grocery store right now, you can wear a mask, but you can't control whether someone else wears a face mask. That's their boundary, that's their control. Now, if it becomes illegal to be in public without a face mask, then the police would be enforcing that. So do you see what I mean? The limits, the things that you can control are what you can control with yourself. Now, the last few things I'm going to talk about are our talents. All of us were born with some kind of talent. What you do with that talent is up to you. Now, I've seen some amazing artists go through my doors. There's just amazing given talents that people have, but they don't go very far with them unless they practice them. So you have been given certain talents. And generally speaking, you will be happier if you are exercising your talents in a good, healthy way and you're being productive. You're making something. None of us truly feels happy just sitting around and acting like the human equivalent of a sea sponge. Just breathing in air, exhaling carbohydrates, and then, none of us is truly happy that way. We're all better off when we're actually able to create things, to do things that are useful or beautiful or fun or helpful. That's how we are meant to be. We're meant to be productive. And we've been given gifts that come up inside of us, mental capacities, emotional capacities. There's all kinds of intelligences. You can look up emotional intelligence. You can look up all the spatial intelligence. For example, my husband inherited a kinetic intelligence that he can look at something and touch it and he can figure out how it works. And I'm sitting there reading the directions page by page. Okay, all of us have different intelligences, different gifts, and we're responsible for how we use them. And finally, no one else can control our thoughts. There's no such thing as mind control. I can't control your thoughts. You can't control mine. Those are our responsibility. Especially with mental disorders, this is something that can be very challenging. If you are prone to depression, you may find yourself consuming yourself up with thoughts that lead you to greater and greater depression. And that's something you do have some control over. If you say, you know what, I'm finding myself going down the same path mentally every time, as hard as it's going to be, I'm going to retrain my brain to stop thinking like that. And it's very difficult. And with some people, when their brain pathways have been triggered by trauma, for example, you need actual external help. But it is still possible to retrain your brain. The things that we choose to spend our time and our emotion and our money on, our desires and our love, this is up to us. It's not up to someone else. So this is another way of rephrasing boundaries, and it's something that helps people who may be, stuck in a codependent relationship. So a boundary is a definite place where your responsibility ends and another person's begins. It stops you from doing things for other people that they should be doing for themselves. A boundary also prevents you from rescuing someone from the consequences of their destructive behavior that they need to experience in order to grow. So that's restating the things I talked about before. Now, this is something I want you guys to understand. These are spheres. It's a slightly different way of talking about boundaries than I just did. but I like how they explain this. So let's talk about material boundaries. This is about your possessions. So this is a lot easier to demonstrate in person. So let's say little Susie here, my little Susie finger, has an apple. And little Jose over here wants Susie's apple. Susie says, no, that's my apple. I'm going to eat it. And little Jose takes her apple and says, haha, I took your apple. He has violated Susie's boundaries. All of us have material possessions, and we need to hold those boundaries. This is mine, not yours. We can share. We don't have to be selfish, but we have to acknowledge I have a right to the things that are mine, and you have a right to the things that are yours. Okay? That's healthy. That's normal. An emotional boundary is something where most of you, girls especially, you probably have never given someone an emotional boundary, but it's a very good idea to learn how to do, because especially good listeners tend to not be able to give good boundaries to other people, but you need to. So, for example, if someone is just pouring out their heart and they're venting, and unfortunately something they say triggers you, triggers some trauma, some memory that happened to you in your past, and it's building up all this anxiety and panic and fear inside of you because you're being triggered, you need to be able to say, I'm sorry, I love you, I can't talk about this right now because of what's going on inside of me, so I need you to stop talking about this. And it sounds mean, but it's not mean. If you hold good emotional boundaries, they're responsible for their emotions, you're responsible for your emotions. You can't be taking other people's emotions up because it doesn't fix them. You can't actually take somebody's bad emotions, fix them, and then give them back. We're not robots. We don't have emotion chips like the Star Trek Data. So you have to hold your emotional boundaries. I'm willing to talk about this. I'm willing to help you out here. I'm willing to care, but sometimes I might need to pull back, and that's just me holding my boundaries. Our time and energy is something we need to have boundaries on. So, for example, in your family, you owe them a certain amount of your time, labor, energy. It's part of being a family. You pay your rent to your family by doing the things that help your family. So, for example, my son takes out the trash. He doesn't pay us rent to live with us. He takes out the trash when it needs to be taken out. That is part of the contract that we have living with each other as a family. When you are adults, you will have almost complete control over your time and energy, unless you, of course, need to get a job, which, of course, is a good thing to do. And so then you will contract with someone else. I will give you my labor for these hours, and in return, you'll give me money. It's still your boundary. You still get to say, this is what my time is worth. This is how I plan on using my time. This is your boundary. Your mental boundaries talk about your mental freedom. This is my thoughts. You cannot tell me what to think. They're my thoughts. Only I get to decide what to think about. Only I get to decide what beliefs to have. Only I get to decide what opinions. One of the things that I've been trying to do in this class is teach you guys, like I said in the Einstein quote, education's not the learning of facts, but of training the mind to think. And one of the things I believe very firmly is you guys need to learn how to think for yourselves, how to think logically and critically of the things that you're being taught. Not that you should go around disagreeing and just being disagreeable with everyone. They might be right and you might be wrong. You need to learn how to think and process and compare right and wrong and good logic, bad logic. This is something that is your responsibility, but it's also your freedom. No one can change your thoughts except you. And finally, I think the most obvious boundary is the physical one. Proximity, touch. If someone touches you in a way that's inappropriate, they have violated your physical boundary. Now, we talked about trauma. A small t trauma does not endanger your bodily safety. A big T trauma does. So, for example, rape. If someone violates your physical boundaries and commits a sexual offense against you, they have violated your physical boundaries, and that's a big T trauma. This can happen in all kinds of ways. If I went up to somebody and started rubbing their shoulders and they were not comfortable with that, I would have violated their physical boundaries. If a boyfriend and girlfriend are dating and the girlfriend is they're both at her parents' house, and the boy sees her mother coming, so he grabs her and he kisses her really smushy face, blah blah blah, blah, all over the place, and it embarrasses her because she didn't want her mother to see that. That's violating a physical boundary. Even though you are in a relationship, you are still in charge of your body. Becoming in a relationship with someone doesn't mean that they have complete and total control and access to your body. If you want to say, no, I'm not comfortable with this, that's your boundary, that's your body. This is why it's possible for even for married people, for a married person to rape their spouse. Because even when you're married, you can still say, no, I don't want that right now, or ever. This is your physical boundary. This is your body. You're in charge of it. All right. It's been a lot. Hopefully you guys have learned some things. I want you to think about this and respond on the Nearpod code. What boundary do you have the hardest time keeping? And when I ask this question, I'm asking you to use these 5 categories: emotional, material, physical, mental, or time energy. Now think about your life. Think about the things that happen when you have allowed somebody to convince you to do something, or violated your boundary in some way. Which one do you have the hardest time keeping? Okay, so we're done for the day. I hope you guys learned something. Take care of yourselves. Talk to you later.